Jeff Bezos has the same phone as me. Just want to note that.
Brag.
Not an Amazon.
Well, because he's
Amazon
waiting.
Fire or whatever.
Jeff and I are waiting for the price of the iPhone 11 to come down a little. From KUOW in Seattle, welcome to Friday. Welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke, and I'm here with Erica C. Barnett. And the C, by the way, that's for crank. It stands for crank. The C is for crank.com. Hi, Erica.
Hi, Bill.
I can just barely see you over the computer screen. Hi. And from Crosscut, two people from Crosscut. David Kroman, you're a reporter. Hi.
Hello.
Mohammed Kloub, you're the audience engagement editor at
Yes.
Crosscut.
Hello. Thank you for having me
Good
again.
to see you all. Yeah. And as if hearing us weren't enough, you can see us live on Facebook at facebook.com/KUOW Public Radio. Okay, let's get at the news. The first item we're going to discuss is this. There was a cluster of shootings in downtown Seattle this weekend, 3 in a couple of days. On Wednesday evening at about 5 o'clock, Seattle police say 3 men argued outside the McDonald's at 3rd and Pine. Some number of them fired guns. 1 person died. 7 are wounded, including a 9-year-old boy. The police have arrested 1 suspect. 2 other suspects are at large, have been identified, and Mayor Durkin says she will act.
I will tell you this is, I will be the mayor that is going to try every single day to fix 3rd and Pine, and 4th and Pine, and 5th and Pine, and the courthouse, and Rainier Valley, and Lake City Way. We have to make sure that people in this city not only are safe, but feel safe.
And she said that the downtown core of Seattle is one of the safest in America. Does anyone know what Mayor Durkin is or will be proposing?
Well, it sounds like there's going to be an extension of the emphasis patrols that are already happening in downtown and at that corner. There's some talk about doing more environmental type improvements. So
an emphasis patrol is just more police?
It's essentially more police. There's a mobile unit that's being deployed at 4th and Pine. So you'll see more of a police presence there, as we have in the past with similar events at this corner in particular. And otherwise, I mean, it feels like a little bit a repeat of what we always do when there's a violent event, particularly a violent event downtown. And not to say that these types of patrols don't make a difference in the short term, but typically, I mean, yesterday they were citing the 9.5 block strategy as a success story, and which was when the police cracked down on a bunch of drug dealers and people engaged in low-level criminal activity in the same area. That happened in 2015, and here we are. So not sure that any of these efforts tend to be very effective in the long term, but that's what it looks like they're going to do.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we're hearing, I talked to he's the executive director of the Downtown Seattle Association yesterday, and
this is the business
the sort of business
representation.
Yeah, exactly. And he's saying, he's basically agreeing with Erica that we don't think, we appreciate these emphasis patrols, but we don't think that they have a long-term effect. And so basically we're saying we want them to not be emphasis patrols, but all the time heightened patrols. But there's also, I think this sort of comes at, there's always been problems with 3rd Avenue. And there's always been sort of efforts to fix it, but I think this comes at a particularly fraught time where the city has already been talking a lot about this, quote, prolific offender thing where people are arrested a lot, repeatedly. And my understanding is that 2 of the people involved in the shooting have been arrested a large number of times. And
65 combined arrests, 4 felony convictions, 30 misdemeanor convictions.
Right. And so we are sort of back now with a tragic example of this debate that has been going on now for especially, quite a bit in the last year, which is what is the best way to handle people who have those extensive criminal records. And there's a significant portion of the city that's calling for harsher sentencing, longer sentences. And then there's the kind of counter narrative of, data doesn't show that longer sentences necessarily makes a difference. So what we need to be doing is doubling down on diversion efforts and outreach and things like that. And this, I think, this has been a conversation that's been going on for a while, but now that there is, somebody has actually died in this area, I think gasoline has been poured on that debate.
Mo, any other observations?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what David said in that, this isn't anything that surprising. And I think there was a Seattle Times article giving some context as well about how it's always been, kind of a fraught area But I think once someone dies, that really adds to it. But some of the the simplistic explanations I've been seeing are just, I mean, we were joking before about how people are talking about just shutting down that McDonald's on that corner. Like,
Who's proposing that?
I don't think, was it in the
question.
There's a petition.
A question came up in the press conference of whether the mayor would shut down the McDonald's. And
Yeah.
I'm not even sure she can do that. But
Yeah.
I mean, of course she can't, and she can't impose harsher sentences, and she can't, and nor is she proposing to. And I think her press conference yesterday was correctly cautious, and she did point out, look, I'm not the one. We can't do. I'm paraphrasing here, but we can't do sort of extrajudicial two-strike sentencing, which is what some people are calling for.
But who I think will end up kind of in the crosshairs on this are King County Prosecuting Attorney Dan Satterberg and, to maybe a lesser extent, but definitely City Attorney Pete Holmes. But Satterberg in particular because his office handles felonies. And so, he was notably not at the press conference yesterday. So all we've heard from his office is a short statement. But I think that there will probably be more scrutiny around his sentencing practices.
I think one thing this speaks to is a simplistic media narrative that is really unfortunate, and about mass shootings and about violence in general. This is being boiled down in some of the media to gang violence. They've presented no evidence for that so far, and so I would caution against believing that this is gangs fighting over territory, as one very prominent commentator said yesterday. And I think, simplistic interpretations of things like this lead to simplistic, quote unquote, solutions. Like this is being interpreted as part of the widespread prolific offender problem, right? Well, the convictions that these two guys who are still at large had are for felony and violent convictions. This is not the same population necessarily that we're talking about when we're talking about low-level drug offenders downtown. And so it's all getting conflated into this big mass of let's just crack down on everybody and drive everybody out of there. If they close that McDonald's, it'll be an empty space. And then next to it is, a money mart place. And so then what? You close that down. Then you close down the smoke shop. And then you've got an empty block downtown where retail businesses are not moving into. And, it's easy to see how that doesn't solve the problem. But I also know that it's very easy to say, well, let's just shut the McDonald's down or whatever, and that'll solve it, or let's lock everybody up. And there's just no evidence that kind of activity works.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a bit concerning just to jump to that because, I mean, like what being open on that corner would make it, like, quote unquote, safer, Like, is it a CrossFit? Is it a Whole Foods? Yeah, I just don't think, and, I was chatting with someone about this, but, like, I briefly covered shootings in Chicago, and one thing I learned there is to definitely avoid simplistic explanations. Like, if someone tells you this happened because of one thing, likely not to be trusted, right? It's a variety of things that lead to something like this, and tackling them needs to be just as complicated, right? It's a multi-pronged approach. So, yeah, I don't think shutting down the McDonald's. I saw a lot of people on Twitter being like this is silly. Like that place is a place to find refuge from the rain, to get a bite to eat. I've definitely ran in there. Like there's nowhere to use a public restroom around that area, and that's yeah, I don't know if shutting that down is the answer.
A person who says she often spends time near the McDonald's told us about the clientele.
It's a tight-knit group of people that are experiencing it's hard, that are homeless. And the way the news portrays it is, drugs and gangs. It's not. We really are like a family and good people. It's hard. It hits close because I just walk by there. The energy, when you walk in there. We all are. We see each other every day. Every day we work together for food or for whatever it is we need, and so it's tight. It's close. As far as gangs, there's not really gangs down here. I mean, there's people from different areas of town, right? We really don't fight like that, though.
I think Mayor Durkin, at least at one point, characterized the shootings as gang activity, but the police chief said that the man who has been arrested was a known gang member, but that doesn't mean this was a gang dispute. We don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
And to sort of further highlight the complexity of all this is that the woman who died was formerly homeless. She lived in a permanent supportive housing building run by Plymouth Housing. And so, I think a lot of times what happens is people conflate all, homelessness and public safety and all things like that. But, for the people who are experiencing or struggling with homelessness or have past struggled with homelessness, they tend to be some of the most vulnerable in these sorts of situations.
And there just aren't a lot of safe spaces in downtown Seattle or any part of Seattle that people experiencing homelessness can go during the day. There are certainly libraries. There's the downtown library, but it's pretty hard to go and just camp out in a downtown Starbucks. Although I suppose you can do that too. But your interviews with the people at McDonald's really point to the fact that that these are vulnerable people hanging out in a place where that's not going to kick them out, and there aren't many places like that for them.
Finally, Mayor Durkin said we need to get guns out of the hands of criminals. She said if this had been a fist fight, 8 people would not have ended up at the hospital. I was reading that we know New York State makes it relatively hard to own a gun. You need a permit to buy a handgun and background checks for any gun sale. And their attorney general says the vast majority of guns used in crimes are handguns that came from 6 states with weak gun laws where it's easy for traffickers to get guns and funnel them into the black market. The state legislature is considering a whole bunch of gun bills, but including a ban on semi-automatic weapons that comes up regularly, a ban on large capacity magazines, centralized background check system, background checks on ammunition sales, and giving cities more ability to have stricter gun control than the state does. So those are all issues that we'll keep following in the legislature. Another note on this shooting on Wednesday is that the price to get an Uber or a Lyft out of downtown rose to 5 times as much as normal. So people were your app was telling you it's going to cost you $114 to get from downtown to Wallingford or West Seattle. Elena Becker was near the shooting. She told Cairo 7 she had trouble getting out of the area.
I think that Lyft did force people to make a choice between their own safety and paying excessive amounts of money. To take advantage of a high need, like a high demand, due to an active shooter situation is terrifying, because it's terrifying to think of the highest bidder getting access to safety while the rest of us are forced to sit there. What's going to happen next time and the time after that? And where are the policies that are going to protect people from predatory price gouging like this?
Lyft apologized and said they'll reimburse people affected by the price increase. Uber said they immediately capped trip pricing at 6 o'clock and they're working to refund people affected by surge pricing.
I think that, first of all, as somebody who doesn't typically use car services to get in and out of downtown, which is the best served area by transit in the entire city and state, I find that comment a little hard to relate to. But I would also point out that surge pricing, although it was automatic, and so it's not like somebody at Lyft, was sitting there with giggling as the demand went up and increasing the price. But the reason that they do surge pricing is to encourage more people to come into an area where there is high demand.
Encourage more drivers to come.
More
and
drivers,
serve those
and
customers.
so essentially, what you're saying is, that those drivers should not be compensated for not only coming into an area of town that is an active shooter situation at the time, but that they shouldn't be compensated for the tremendous amount of time it's going to take to get out of downtown and to Wallingford or wherever people live. And I just don't agree that that's a good situation either. I mean, you're basically saying that you want underpaid immigrants, who make up a lot of Lyft and Uber's driver base, to come into a dangerous situation for the convenience of not having to sit on a bus. And I just, while I read those tweets initially and I was like, wow, that is a lot of money to get out of downtown. You're all sitting in the same traffic and the bus is $2.75.
Yeah, I mean, it's that money, I think, from surge pricing goes to the drivers to get them to, it wasn't, like Erica was saying, a malicious thing on Lyft's part. If there's high demand, then that, I think, automatically kicks in to get more drivers out on the streets to pick people up. So it's great that they're reimbursing people now. But also, I think one of the things I saw after this for the first time is that people are saying Google Maps now shows you active shooter situations. So the technology's out there. They could probably figure out, when it's not a normal uptick and when something is happening, and implement some sort of system. And I'm sure that's probably something they want to work on after this that doesn't charge people a bunch. But yeah, that also does bring back the question of, okay, so if you don't do that, if you don't increase prices during that, you're just letting drivers drive into active shooter situations for the same amount of money. I don't know why they would do that. So
Does the Uber and Lyft driver, does Seattle shooting pop up on their maps? And
I mean,
they don't have to serve that area, right?
if they're using Google Maps, but I can see how, again, if you are not making a lot of money and the chance to make $200, which were some of the examples people were posting on Twitter, pops up, you might weigh your safety a little bit differently. And I think it's, you talk about people being able to get out of a situation. Well, you're inviting people into that situation when you're calling Lyft and Uber drivers to come in and whisk you away to your home, outside downtown. So I just find that really troubling.
Now, the light rail was shut down during that, right? Just
Yeah.
for investigation
Briefly, yeah.
purposes.
And
yeah.
I was actually downtown during when this happened, and I was in Pioneer Square, so away from where the shooting took place. But people were pouring in from the Pioneer Square station I was having dinner, and the whole place filled up with just people who were like meeting colleagues randomly, and like we ended up talking to a guy next to us, and it kind of became this like camaraderie situation where everybody was in the same boat. Like, well, we can't get home for a couple hours, so let's go, not to be cheesy, but meet some of our neighbors. And so that was a little bit of good that came out of the situation rather than, people getting on Twitter and blaming companies for not serving them fast enough.
All right, we need to pause there. In the coming days, there's a person hunt, right, for two people considered armed and dangerous, and there'll be conversations with, as you said, the King County prosecutor and the city attorney about repeat offenders. All that'll happen. We'll follow all of that on KUOW Seattle. We're going to continue with the Week in Review in just a moment. Stay tuned.
This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. Sound stories, sound voices. It's 12:23. Live coverage of today's impeachment proceedings is available right now online at KUOW.org.
Support for KUOW comes from Salesforce, dedicated to helping growing businesses connect their teams, share information, and automate processes, all in a single app. Learn more at salesforce.com/SMB.
From KUOW in Seattle, this is the Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. We're streaming this live on Facebook if you want to watch the whole thing. And, in some cases, the C is for Crosscut. That would be the case for David Kroman and Mohammed Kloub. But in the case of Erica C. Barnett, the C is actually for Crank, as it turns out.
Well, as David pointed out on Twitter, I have also written for Crosscut. And actually, Public Cola was a product of Crosscut for a while.
For like 2 months, right?
For like 2 months, yeah.
I stand corrected. The C is always for Crosscut at some point. It's just a matter of time. Continuing with the Week in Review now. This year, King County voters can pull out their phone, not just to text, surf, photograph, write mean comments about NPR articles. No, they can also vote. You can vote for the King County Conservation District Board of Supervisors online, and we're the first county in the U.S. to do that. So many questions, like, what is the King County Conservation District Board of Supervisors, for example? It's a thing.
It is
It's a very low voter turnout, relatively low stakes way to start this vote online
they make
experiment.
sure like ditches are clear and stuff like that.
Yeah. Voter turnout is usually like 1%. This conservation district is not allowed to hold its elections during the big election times, like the primary in August or the general in November. So I believe February is the vote for this conservation district. So who can tell us why the county is doing this?
Well, I mean, not only is it in February, but you have to go online and ask for a ballot. You have to request to vote. So it's not like people are getting their ballots in February and then choosing not to vote. You have to be proactive in order to vote in this, which is why it's like, I think it was 1.2 million people could vote in this election and 4,000 people were. So I think it's even less than 1% turnout.
And the county doesn't have voters' contact information, right? Or if they do, they don't automatically send a note saying, "Hey, there's a vote coming up."
Well, I think it's just like something. I think it's just cost too much money. I think they decided that they didn't want to spend the money to make that happen.
To send a text, send an email.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure about
Okay.
that. But it strikes me that if they are, I know and I understand the concerns about this, and I know that the Washington Secretary of State Kim Wyman has expressed concerns about mobile voting, and I can understand people's concerns about this. If there was a time to try it, I think that this election is probably it, because there's no world in which you can argue less than 1% turnout, and you have to go and specially request your ballot is actually really representative democracy. If you're having 1%, if 4,000 people in a $1.2 million voting or 1.2 million voter block of voters is deciding who runs this thing, and democracy is already not working very well in that situation. So if you're going to experiment, might as well experiment in a place like this.
I mean, I think David brings up a good point. Like, I'm a journalist. I'm always staring at the news. I know people like David, and I'm constantly following them, but I just found out recently that you have to request a ballot for this, and I didn't know that was a thing in any election, right? To have that few people voting, yes, if you're going to try this anywhere, do it in something relatively low stakes like that. It's funny to me to imagine someone sitting there planning to hack the conservation district election. And
But is the Secretary of State saying that this could expose the whole county election system more broadly? Or
I think the argument is just that mobile voting in general is fraught with all kinds of problems. One being that that votes can be hacked, and that there is not a paper record in the same sense that we think of a paper record where you vote on a piece of paper. There is a printout of the final vote that's registered, but there are opportunities in there for votes to be hacked. Now, Julie Wise, the King County Department of Elections, gave a quote to, I believe, the Seattle Times, saying that she's absolutely certain that there's no way this can be hacked or something along those lines, that I think she could regret making such an absolute statement. It's the kind of thing that I don't think, is super smart to say on the record, but I also think, this hasn't been tested, and I don't know that a 4,000 person test should be used in any case, however it goes, as a test to say, well, let's just open it up to the rest of the 1.2 million voters, right? I mean, because you're already dealing with a self-selected, highly motivated group of voters. And so I don't know, is that a test for how it will work for the entire King County? Probably not.
Well, maybe it's a hackability test or a voter, an accuracy test.
Right.
So, but by the way it works is that you log on to an online portal and you use your name and date of birth, because only you know your name and date of birth. I mean, that's locked down. That's rock solid. You vote, and then you sign your name on whatever the touch screen is and submit the ballot. Have you ever tried to sign? Because what the county elections will match the signature on file with the signature you traced with your, I don't know, is it just your finger? Because my signature with my finger looks nothing like anything, much less my actual signature on a check.
My signature has gotten challenged so many times.
Really?
With the changes, and I just changed the signature on my license and my voter registration to essentially just a line.
Really? Well, then it'll match.
So I am highly,
match.
I guess, I mean, maybe I'm a bad example of someone who is highly hackable.
Yeah.
But
Well, the one thing I will say about this is it seems like it's a very modern fix to this problem, which is, I mean, there are clearly a lot of problems with this, which is, for one, Washington State loves its special districts. There are so many of these small little bodies that, the fire district of, the 5th district fire commissioners or whatever, and the King County conservation commissioners, and there's all of these little mini bodies that have proliferated in Washington, and it's impossible to keep up with it. And so, I think maybe that's the first conversation that should be had, which is, do we need all of these special districts that we're creating? And then, why is it happening in February? If we really want more people to turn out, let's put it on the November ballot with the rest of it. It does seem like we see this a lot when there's this problem and someone comes in and says, I've got an, let's make an app and let's fix it, rather than sort of looking at some of the more obvious problems with this, which is maybe sitting right in front of us.
Well, on the subject of online voting, is there an access argument that it's going to make it easier to vote, and that's a good thing?
I think yes, but Washington is already the most accessible state in the country. Well, I don't know about the most, but it's at least
we vote by mail.
At least tied for first as far as accessibility goes, because You don't. Yeah, you vote by mail, and you don't even need to put a stamp on your ballot. It just shows up in your mailbox, and you fill it out, and you put it in. And you can write, you can write in crayon across your ballot, like, I vote for this person.
And sign with just a line.
With just a line. And somebody at election headquarters, it's an intent state. So if your intent is clear, your vote will be counted. Okay. Somebody might call you and say, did you mean to write this in crayon? But eventually they will kind of figure it out. And so there are a lot of layers to make voting in Washington very easy. And so, it'll be interesting to see.
I want to make clear, my signature is not literally a line. Please don't hack me.
Okay, sorry.
I mean, I feel like election hacking it's only going to get more sophisticated, right? No one's going to be pedaling backwards now, and paper trails can only be a good thing, right? And like David was just listing all the ways that Washington already tries to make it accessible, and I appreciate trying to make it as accessible as possible, but you kind of have to make sure it's not just accessible but secure, because you have to balance that with making sure the votes actually count, right? So yeah, I personally feel like paper trails are good in ensuring that every vote counts and is not hackable. It should be the priority.
All right, well, the Seattle Democrat who's running against the Secretary of State, Gail Tarleton, called this mobile device voting an unacceptable risk. Quote, we just saw the Saudis hack Jeff Bezos. If they can hack Bezos, they can certainly hack the average voter. I take it you've all heard about the Jeff Bezos hack. Bezos got his iPhone 10 hacked. First of all, Jeff Bezos has the same phone as me. Just want to note that.
Brag.
Not an Amazon.
Well, because he's
Amazon
waiting. Jeff and I are waiting for the price of the iPhone 11 to come down a little. It's a little rich for our blood. It's a little steep. So what happened basically is that in 2018, Bezos and Saudi Arabia's crown prince were at a dinner together in Los Angeles. They exchanged phone numbers, as one does. And Bezos got repeated WhatsApp messages from the prince without prompting. A few days later, Bezos got a message from that account with a video of Saudi and Swedish flags with Arabic text. And my first question was, did he click on the video? And we still don't know that yet. Even after this forensic analysis, that's one question that hasn't been either announced or known. Apparently, some malware doesn't require you to click on a file, in which case, why send it in video? Why draw attention to it? I don't know. But anyway, in the day after it was sent, Bezos' iPhone began sending large amounts of data, which increased approximately, getting this from the New York Times, which increased approximately 29,000% over his normal data usage. So eventually the messages begin to suggest that the sender had intimate knowledge of Mr. Bezos' private life. One message included a photo of a woman resembling Ms. Sanchez, who Bezos was seeing. You probably recall. The photo was captioned, quote, arguing with a woman is like reading the software license agreement. In the end, you have to ignore everything and click I agree. That's the humor there from the Saudi crown prince. Hilarious. So Bezos paid a forensic expert to investigate, and hidden in that file was a separate bit of code that most likely implanted malware that gave attackers access to Bezos' entire phone, including his photos and private communications. Reaction?
I mean, it's incredible the latitude that we give to Saudi Arabia. I think
we gave the crown prince the hackers the latitude to go through the crown prince's phone.
Well, apparently Jeff Bezos feels okay with giving Mohammed bin Salman his private phone number and communicating with him and getting dinner with him in L.A., despite the fact that he is now an accused murderer of a Washington Post columnist.
In fact, there may be a connection, that the Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, the Post has been reporting on the murder of this Saudi dissident, Jamal Khashoggi, and the Post has been criticizing the Saudi government. And
the Post has been criticizing Trump, and Trump is connected. This is all, supposedly or possibly or maybe likely connected to the National Enquirer publishing private texts and threatening to publish nude pics of Bezos, what he called a below-the-belt selfie.
Yes. The National Enquirer says, no, that was Sanchez's brother, but Bezos doesn't buy it.
Yeah, I mean, it's every part of the story is fishy, but I just somehow feel like it all connects back to Trump in some way. I can't quite connect the dots for you because it's such a
win a
complex
Pulitzer
story.
if you do.
Yeah, right. But it's Boy, what a mess. And, I don't know if Bezos, as the head of Amazon, is particularly cognizant of his own security, but it just goes to show, how easy it is to fall for things, click on a link or open a link and not click on it, and how, vigilant you have to be, even if you're the head of Amazon Web Services.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's Exhibit A for why, doing things that could compromise, like voting or like a whole election. Like, if Jeff Bezos can get hacked, what chance does the average voter stand, And you would think his security methods would be a little stronger, or I don't know. I guess you'd be wrong. He just uses WhatsApp like any normal person. So
Right. The Saudi Arabian foreign minister says accusations that the kingdom was involved are absurd.
Absurd is exactly the right word. The idea that the Crown Prince would hack Jeff Bezos' phone is absolutely silly.
But a UN official who co-wrote the report said, as did Mohammed Kloub a moment ago, quote, it basically means that we are all extremely vulnerable. This is the Week in Review. That's our slogan. We are all extremely vulnerable. We're going to continue discussing what happened this week in just a moment. Don't go away.
She was in the mainframe. Check the computer. Check the computer.
The mainframe computer. I accessed the mainframe.
Check the computer.
The mainframe computer. You're in the mainframe.
He's locked us out of the mainframe.
Who's locked you out of the mainframe?
The mainframe is out of the coolant.
The Week in Review continuing on KUOW. I'm Bill Radke with David Kroman and Erica C. Barnett and Mohammed Kloub, and we're streaming the whole thing on Facebook right now. This week, a Snohomish County man was diagnosed with a virus that has killed at least 26 people in China and infected at least 900 people there. This was the first report of the virus in the United States. This morning, a second case was reported in Chicago. Coronaviruses are actually pretty common. Most people will be infected with one at some point in their lifetime, but most of them are not as strong as your immune system. This virus originated in animals like camels, bats, and civets, which are a spectacular-looking mongoose-like animal. They're usually not transmissible to humans, but occasionally a coronavirus mutates and can pass from animals to humans and then from human to human, as happened with SARS, if you'll remember that, a few years ago. So who can tell us what we know about this Snohomish County case?
Well, I mean, he apparently acted exactly in the way that he should have. He kind of figured out he had these symptoms, which
he had been traveling in Wuhan, China.
In Wuhan, news started coming out. He realized he had these symptoms, and he, I guess, reported them quickly and promptly, and kind of isolated himself. So, I mean, the concern with some of
flew into SeaTac Airport, by
right.
the way.
The concern with some of these viruses is that in some ways it's harder to contain if the symptoms are weaker, because people don't really think anything of it. They go about and continue to go about their normal lives, but meanwhile kind of spreading this disease, or just don't really piece together symptoms with where they were. And so it's very fortunate, at least according to the public health officials who put out statements about this, very fortunate that he recognized what it was and reported it. And they seem to, they seem to be saying that at least for people in Washington, the threat is minimal, pretty well contained. So that's comforting.
This guy's in an isolation unit in Everett, Providence Regional Medical Center.
And it sounds like, I mean, so far at least, this coronavirus doesn't seem to be anything like SARS, for example, which had, I think, 11% fatality rate, something like that. And the percentage of deaths, to confirmed cases is pretty low. I don't know how it compares to like the ordinary flu, which also kills people every year. So that's, I don't know, comforting, I guess. I mean, I think that,
as often happens, it's mostly older people die. I mean, these things tend to attack the most vulnerable people.
Except with the bird flu a few years ago, as I recall. And I wrote a to me now delightfully alarmist piece about it in like 2005 or something.
Yeah, I have a little quote from that. I think it said, now this might have been the headline writer, but it said, this is in 2007, right? Oh, now I can't find it. It was something like,
be afraid.
Be afraid. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Be afraid. Bird flu is coming. We're all going to die, except me. I'm not going to die, but you sure as hell are. What was that about?
Oh, man. That was when avian flu was going around, and it was really looking like it could be a pandemic. And I think the lesson that we learned from that is not that we're not going to die. Obviously, I am still here, as are you. That that pandemics are very unpredictable, and I think if what happens in this particular case of coronavirus is that it doesn't turn into a pandemic, or it doesn't really cause horrible symptoms, it doesn't kill people. I think that we take too much comfort in that, and we don't work on things like universal flu vaccines or other preventative type measures that drug companies tend to not fund, and that governments tend to not care about enough, because we've moved on to the next crisis and forgotten about the last one. And so that's what I predict will probably happen with this one as well.
And Mo, what else do we know about this virus?
Well, so I think one of the most salient things I read to remember is that these viruses usually aren't contagious until you're showing symptoms, which is not typically the norm. And you have to be in really close contact, like close enough, I think it said, to get the other person's saliva on you, which is gross. But yeah, so
gives me some idea.
But so we definitely, I mean, like Erica was saying, sometimes it feels a little cyclical, right? Like, oh, it's swine flu, it's avian flu, it's whatever. We freak out for like a small amount of time and then move on. But the advice is the same every time. It's do preventative things. Like maybe all of our collective hygiene needs to be better. It says like for now, what the CDC is advising is just wash your hands, don't spread germs, cover your coughs.
Don't go to work if you have. I don't know exactly what the symptoms are. I'd have to. Anybody can Google them.
They're similar to pneumonia. Yeah. So and like David said, that makes it hard, I think, to know what you have, right? Because it's so similar to other things.
Right.
But if we were practicing these things more regularly, then I think it would. We should be less alarmist. We should just always be doing these things, and then maybe it wouldn't feel so cyclical.
Wash less, freak out. No, wash more, freak out less.
Yes.
Got that backwards.
Not the opposite.
Not the opposite.
Well, I think really though, what the biggest concern is that these viruses change, and because it's when you see a new virus, you don't know how it's going to react. So they're saying now that it's not as bad as SARS or Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, MERS, and that's good to hear. But they're also saying, that this is new. They don't really know how it's going to react. So it could get worse. It could become more deadly. And it's just, I've read The Stand. You get worried about new viruses.
I think that what we should not take away is that we should institute travel bans and quarantines the way Wuhan has done, because historically, I was just reading up on this today. Historically, that it doesn't work to contain the spread of a virus, and B, it instills mistrust in government, and it causes.
Why does it instill mistrust? Because I suppose if it doesn't work, then
because it tends to come with, well, first of all, because you're not allowed freedom of movement, and people tend to resist not being allowed freedom of movement, right? But I, and I think it also creates a kind of secrecy. I mean, people do get around travel bans. They do sneak out even when they're exhibiting symptoms. And it creates, this sense that, well, if you have any kind of symptoms of any kind, you can't tell. So I mean, obviously that's not going to happen in the United States anyway, but I do think that the example of Wuhan is really instructive in what not to do.
Some other details before we move on. This Snohomish County man is, by the way, in satisfactory condition at Providence in Everett. He's in this isolation unit. He's being treated by a few medical workers and a robot equipped with a stethoscope that the nursing staff moves around the room so they can see the patient on the screen and talk to him. I guess they're not in the room. You're right that the World Health Organization says it's not yet a global health emergency. The health officials they're in contact with at least 43 people in this area, or at least that this Snohomish County man was in contact with. But they're not saying, the CDC is not saying what airport he flew through before SeaTac. The local health officials aren't saying where he went after SeaTac Airport. They're just doing the more low pro kind of, we're contacting people if we think that they were near this person. And if there's a location where we are concerned about, but we can't find this individual, then we'll announce the location, but they haven't done that yet. And finally, to your point about being unpredictable, the World Health, just to take SARS for an example, the World Health Organization said the SARS outbreak is over. They announced that a few years ago. the way the virus could return is if a scientist who got infected while working in a laboratory started a chain of transmission outside the lab. But then there are other viruses that, like the H5N1, remember that whole thing? That the virus, it has stopped killing people, but it's not gone. This influenza expert said it's changed into different versions of itself, and a former CDC official says we don't know how the story's going to end. So you're welcome. Terrifying, yeah.
I think
Be afraid.
the stand
Be afraid. See, Erica was
and you're not gonna, I think the stand starts with a scientist escaping from a...
There's so much fiction that that can tell us what not to do.
All right, we're going to be right back. We're going to continue with the week in review. We're just going to breathe here a little bit and be right back. Stay tuned.
Support for KUOW comes from Susan's Green Cleaning, with a philosophy of caring for customers, employees, and the community, offering residential house cleaning using non-toxic products formulated to reduce environmental impact. Estimates, booking, and more at susansgreencleaning.com or on their app.
The Week in Review on KUOW. I'm Bill Radke. David Kroman, you just reported that cash welfare assistance for Washington State has plummeted. You wrote about that at Crosscut. Why is it plummeted?
Well, it's been plummeting. It's been sort of steadily on the decrease since cash welfare became what it is in the mid-'90s, late 90s. But
this is the Clinton welfare reform,
right?
Putting it to states. Go on.
Yeah, so it became a block grant to states, which gave states a lot more power in how to spend it. And so after the recession, Washington didn't exactly cut the budget of cash welfare, but just changed the rules around how to get on and stay on cash welfare and get these benefits. And so basically made it a lot harder for families to stay on the program. So where you used to be able to get an extension on a lifetime limit, they eliminated that for the most part. So after 5 years, there was a hard cut. Made it so if you didn't comply with some of the requirements around being on cash welfare, the hook to pull you off the program was a lot quicker.
This came out of the recession.
And so it was a sort of interesting means to an end. So rather than just cut the budget for cash assistance, they did this, and then therefore the caseloads dropped, and the number of people that were getting money also went down. So, even just like 10 years ago in 2007, Washington State was spending around $160 million a year of its own money in addition to the federal money on cash welfare. And then last year they spent $13 million. So it's a really precipitous drop, meaning that before, in 2006, 62% of families in poverty in Washington were accessing cash welfare benefits. And last year that's down to just 29%. So it's a pretty dramatic drop.
We bounced back from the recession so much. Regularly, the budget always gets updated because there's this new money rolling into Washington State. So is that about to change?
I think it could change this legislature. I mean, this session, it's a short session, so lots of bills that people in principle support end up dying. So it unclear. But a lot of states cut back on welfare in the post-recession years, but Washington did it in this way where instead of just cutting the budget, they changed the policy so that while a lot of other states around the country have since restored cash welfare back to pre-recession levels, because it wasn't just a budgetary question, Washington has not done that. They have to actually go in and pass new policy laws around what it means to be on cash welfare.
That's harder to do.
And it's harder to do.
What are some of the policies that are hoops that people have to jump through now that they didn't have to before?
So basically, since Bill Clinton created welfare as we know it now, the whole program has become much more tied to getting people into work. It's all about, taking personal responsibility and things like that. And so you've always needed to meet all of these requirements around a certain number of hours per week that you're working towards trying to get a job. What changed, though, is, over the course for your whole life, you're only allowed to receive cash welfare for 5 years. So not 5 consecutive years, but just a cumulative of 5 years. Before the recession, if you were doing everything you needed to be doing, so you're putting in the number of hours that you need to during the week, and then you hit that 5 years, and as long as you're still doing what you're supposed to do, you could almost automatically get an extension on that 5 years. You could stay on the program and continue to receive welfare benefits. What the legislature did is only in the very most sort of dire circumstances cut that off. And so within literally months, almost 5,000 families that were getting cash benefits lost it. And then
So it wasn't really a temporary situation. In effect,
Yeah.
it was a 5-year situation that wasn't being enforced, and now they're enforcing it. It's actually, they're putting the T in the temporary assistance for needy families.
yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily frame it as enforcement because the extension is a pretty common thing, I think, across the country. But they just made it.
But you're
a lot
saying it was
harder.
an automatic extension.
Yeah. Well, you still had to apply and prove that you were
Yeah.
in good standing with the program, but they just cut that off. And then also, it used to be that if you fell out of compliance, so maybe you weren't doing what you needed to do, it used to be you had 4 months to get back into compliance. They shortened that to 2 months. For a little while there, they made it so you could, if you were sanctioned 3 times, you would be permanently removed from receiving cash welfare forever, and that was a change. And so the accumulation of all of these things meant, whereas before the caseloads of people on welfare would sort of rise and fall in lockstep with the number of families who are in poverty, which is kind of what you would expect. Now there's a huge gap between the number of families in poverty and the number of families receiving cash welfare. The sort of the funny trick of it that the legislature has done is because to continue to receive the federal grants, Washington needs to be shows that it's spending that money toward welfare programs. But what Washington legislators figured out is that they could basically justify programs that they were going to fund anyway. So things like public education and workers' compensation. They could use the very vague reporting requirements associated with welfare and basically say, we're counting those as welfare spending. And so therefore, on paper, it looks like we're spending $1 billion on welfare. But the thing that people think of when they think of welfare, which is cash assistance to families, they were cutting that the whole time. And so it's basically, became this budgeting trick where it didn't look like they were cutting welfare, but they were just moving programs that they were funding out of their normal budget and into this welfare umbrella, and so then freeing up money in their kind of general fund budget.
And what is the biggest thing they're spending on that you reported?
And so the umbrella that they are putting that all under is preventing out-of-wedlock pregnancies, which was a tenet that conservative Christians in Congress in the 90s sort of included into the things that you could spend welfare money on, which was these preventing out-of-wedlock pregnancies, but they didn't define what that actually meant. And so what Washington is doing is they're putting things, totally legitimate programs that people might support, things like tutoring or, like I said, workers' compensation and things like that. They are justifying those as somehow preventing out-of-wedlock pregnancies in this very indirect way. But no one's really paying attention to whether or not Washington is actually preventing any out-of-wedlock pregnancies.
Okay, so you can read about that in Crosscut. We'll see whether in a short 60-day session the Democratic majority legislature does anything about this.
Yeah.
In just a moment, we're going to continue on the Week in Review by getting rid of odd voting. Stay tuned. From KUOW, it's the Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. You're hearing us now. You're seeing us if you're on Facebook. And I'm with Erica C. Barnett and Mohammed Kloub and David Kroman. The Washington State Legislature is considering banning voter initiatives in odd-year elections. Who can tell me why the legislature would do that?
Well, the rationale, which was expressed pretty thoroughly in a piece by the Northwest Progressive Institute, is that more people will vote essentially in off-year or in on-year quote-unquote elections, so in even years, and that the situation as it is now is that people are voting for initiatives in very small numbers, and so initiatives affecting the entire state that have like huge impacts on regions like Seattle, but the state as a whole, like I-976, which restricted transportation funding, are getting approved by small minorities of voters.
There's more turnout in the even years because there are bigger, more high-profile elections in those even years?
Exactly, and I have a counterpoint to that because just
Please.
quickly, and then so conservative groups are saying that this doesn't make sense, that the real what people should really be doing if they want to encourage turnout is encouraging turnout in those odd years. And I would say, as a local reporter, I feel somewhat possessive of those odd year elections because that is when all of the local elections and all of our municipal elections across the state are held for the most part. So if initiatives and everything that is of, greater voter interest, quote unquote, I'm giving huge air quotes here, are taken out of those even odd year elections, then that is even more disincentive for people to vote in local elections, which are the area where they can actually most impact policy rather than voting for their state legislators, which they may feel passionate about, but state legislators are one small part of a very large body. When you vote for your city council, you are voting for policies and people that actually impact your lives directly. So I'm against anything that reduces people caring about local elections because I want people to care more about local elections, not less.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Erica. I think the issue underlying this is how do we get people to vote and care more, right? Because I can see both sides of this, right? Like the people who are pro-banning odd-year initiatives, they're saying voting during even years would just be more representative, right? Because more people would come out.
Right.
People opposed to it are saying that long ballots, they really fatigue people. So, everything we're going to be voting on there's going to be one, enormous ballot on the even year, and that's...
So it should be spread out some more to make it less fatiguing.
And sure, but I think both of these are silly because the issue is maybe we should just take voting more seriously. Maybe we should show up on the odd years and not complain about how long a ballot is, right? And there's, like Erica said, the issue is turnout, right? So I think steps like making Election Day a national holiday kind of get more toward what this is trying to address than the silly back and forth about whether the ballot's too long.
Yeah, and it just seems odd to me to just focus on initiatives. So to Erica's point, I mean, are you also going to then make it so we only vote on mayor in even years or city council in even years? Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it in the way that Erica just put it. But yeah, I also have some concerns about just turning odd years into a wasteland.
Right. Okay, finally on the week in review, we hear complaints that Amazon has changed Seattle. One little example, Reddit is mad about Amazon giving its employees big umbrellas, which clog the sidewalks and which Seattleites used to be proud of not using. So I would say if you're passing by someone, lift the umbrella up high. Be a good neighbor.
I was just down there and I noticed this. Is this a new thing? There are these big orange and white.
They've always had those, I think.
Yeah.
They were everywhere yesterday, and it was kind of irritating. It was like where I actually thought, what hotel is giving all these umbrellas out to tourists?
And Mohammed, that reminded you of another complaint.
Yeah. So I mean, I have
30 seconds before the end of the show.
I compare this to backpack etiquette on the bus. When people don't take them off. It's not the backpack's not the issue. The umbrella's not the issue. It's how you're using it. So maybe take that off and don't swing your umbrella in people's faces. But someone did bring up the point, is this really about umbrellas, or are people tired of Amazon workers making themselves known, right?
Yes.
Look at my umbrella.
Yes. All right, courtesy people, you've been listening to the Week in Review on KUOW, produced by Sarah Leibovitz. I'm Bill Radke, and I want to thank Crosscut reporter David Kroman, Crosscut audience engagement editor Mohammed Kloub, and at the C is for Crank, Erica C. Barnett. Thank you, everybody. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks.